Karthikeyan Nachiyappan. He is an architect who has graduated from the Architectural Association. His research has been published in many esteemed journals, such as the Indian Concrete Journal. He is the founder and director of Studio of Architectural Urbanism, an art and architecture consultancy focusing on research and development of housing projects in Ooty and in Chennai. His research interests include low-cost housing, architectural space making, informality and slums, inequalities in planning, and policies and urban design.
Welcome to UGC lecture series on architecture. Lecture number 2 on housing and housing issues. Come, let's take a look at what interesting components we are going to study today. We will be looking at housing policy and different housing sectors, and housing policy over the years, how has it been branched out from the national housing policy, and we'll also look at agencies like HUDCO and their key role in providing housing. Last lecture we were looking at and defining the process of urbanization. So here are some key facts for you to remember on the process of urbanization. The annual growth in urban population has been noted 2.39, and of course the percentage of growth in rural population over the decade has been decreased from 1.7 to 1, which means that there are more people who are moving into cities, and the question of housing become crucial here. And Indian urban population in 2001 was supposed to be 27.8%, and that is projected to be 50% by 2041, which means half of the population in India will be living in cities. When half of the people in India live in cities, the question is on where is the access to housing? Where do people live? So here are some interesting statistics which reveal that around 33% of the population live in more than 2 rooms, and of course 35% live in 1 room. But unfortunately, there are 2.3% of the entire population of India are homeless. They lack security in tenure, and they don't have a place to live or dwell. And also facts reveal that growth of slums has been exorbitant since 1981 till 2001, which means that 26 million population of people in India living in slums in 1981 over 2 decades have grown to 61.8%, which is 3 times much bigger in 2 decades. So all these focus down to one question on what is a housing shortage, and according to the end of 10th 5-year plan or the beginning of 11th 5-year plan, as on 1 April 2007, the total housing deficit was mentioned to be around 24.71 million, out of which EWS constitute 21.78 million, LIG 2.89 million, and the middle and the high income groups, which is negligible, which is 0.04%, which means that totally 99% of the demand lies between the EWS and LIG. Now let's take an interesting look at housing calculator, or the calculation for housing demand in specific state. So say for example, we take the state of Tamil Nadu. Let's name the total households as A, residences or other types of residences, C, temporary households, unclassified which are not yet being classified, dilapidated or deteriorated houses, vacant houses, and totally, which comes to around total residences, homeless, household needing income, and household demand. So in the case of Tamil Nadu, the estimated, all these census relate back to 2001 housing data, so which is around 14,173,626. So out of which 13,699,661 constitute the number of residences, that is total number of residential households, and out of which 270,944 are for residence come other uses, maybe mixed residential residences with other kind of multiple uses. Estimated 3,304,310, which is approximate to be around temporary households, 2181, which is considered to be unclassified, 117,049, which is dilapidated component, and 1,050,624, which is the total number of vacant houses. Now, to reveal the total residences, we need to calculate the number of residences and total number of residential other units, which means that B plus C gives you the component of around 13,970,605. Now, to calculate the homeless, you need to take into account the number of households, which is A, and the total residents. So, when you subtract these two, you get a population of around 203,021. So, which is the unit for number of homeless. Now, households needing house, which is an important component, which is nothing but you have this temporary component and you have this homeless component. So, when you add these two, you get a resultant of 3,507,331. So, the estimated housing need in Tamil Nadu is around 3,507,331. Now, the final calculation of housing demand lies between this component needing house and subtract it from the vacant households. So, when you subtract both, you get an estimated amount of 2,456,707. So, as per 2001 census, the estimated deficit in Tamil Nadu seems to be around 2 million or 24,56,707. So, when there is a huge amount of shortage in housing, what does a country like India do to address this situation? It becomes crucial. So, the resultant of global UN nations in 1987 resulted in many states and countries to form their own national housing policy agenda. So, with that, the key objectives of the national housing policies in every country were to encourage investment in housing, to use housing as a part of a strategy. Housing, as we were looking at in the previous lecture, it is a commodity, and housing is a process and a strategy. It is not a single dwelling unit. And to motivate households to secure affordable housing, to orient public housing agencies towards supply of cheaper land. Land as a commodity again becomes very expensive in order to buy a plot and then build over it. To promote repair, renewal and upgradation of existing housing stock. So, with this, in India in 1988, the establishment of National Housing Policy was done, which was refined in 1994 August. So, since over the timeline of one decade, the population became multifold, now there were a necessity of involving multiple stakeholders and especially private investors. Repeal of Urban Land Ceiling Act so that the land is available at a cheaper price, and involvement of foreign direct investments in housing became crucial at this stage. So, this was the main strategy for the 1998 National Housing Policy, which was otherwise termed as National Housing Habitat Policy. And this in turn, over the decade, due to the emergence of challenges in shelter, especially the growing slum areas, to address those issues, this National Housing Policy was reinvented as National Urban Habitat and Housing Policy, which takes care of the present condition of housing and to address the emergence of shelter in terms of growing slums. Now, even before this, the government of India elected a planning commission in 1950, which let out a series of 5-year plans, which means that every 5 years the plan will be rotated and there will be a growth strategy in 5 years that has been envisioned. And the key objectives of it are: the first, high rate of growth, especially the increase in gross domestic product of the country, economic self-reliance, social justice, modernization of the economy and economic stability. So, obviously, when they foresee the economic stability to be more, they use Keynesian models of economics. So, first, the first plan, let us look at the timeline of the 5-year plans. There are eventually 12 5-year plans which are till date, which started from 1951 to 56, 56 to 61, 61 to 66, and which goes on till today as 2012 to 2017, the 12th 5-year plan. So, let us take a key look at what are in the in-between stages. The first plan was basically based on the Harold Domel model of economics, which means that the growth in rate of growth in a country is assessed by the total savings of an individual by the capital output ratio, which means that the amount of productivity level an individual can hold. So based on this, the model was set up, and this was a Keynesian model depicting investments in agriculture. So at the end of the first 5-year plan, there was a good amount of harvest that was being done, and now after it was a successful model, now the second model turned into Mahalanobis model. It is again a popular economic model in the Western countries, where it just says one principle: move from agriculture to more industries. So moving into more industries, especially in a country like India, means you need increased capital inflows and of course increase in consumer goods. So when investors try to put in more, rope in more capital, which means that they borrow funds from external agencies, and this debt increase the end product, which means that there was seen a high level of increase in the prices. Now moving on to the remaining 5-year plans, from agriculture it shifted again from agriculture, it moved on to industries, and then it came back to agriculture in the third and the fourth 5-year plan, and slowly investments were made based on economic growth, self ability to grow, social justice, modernization technologies, and finally the 12th 5-year plan now dictates that a present 8.2% growth in GDP is to be expected at the end of this. And out of all these, housing also plays a key role in terms of investment. So let's take a look at the housing agencies involved in the provision and development of housing. Housing agencies, which is nothing but actors who play a major role. Cooperative societies, private builders, state level agencies, central government agencies, city level agencies, and community based organizations or non governmental organizations. Now agencies can also be financial agencies. LIC, Life Insurance Corporation of India, Housing Finance Institution, Housing Development Finance Corporation, Apex Cooperative Banks, commercial banks, and of course the National Housing Board or the National Housing Bank. The housing agencies in the public and private sector, which includes the state level, city level, and the central level agencies. State level agencies, which means examples of Tamil Nadu Housing Board, Maharashtra Housing and Development Authority, City and Industrial Development Corporation, which invests on housing boards to provide public housing. Central government agencies like the public work departments, which target a particular section of the society, and they also provide government estates for the employees in government, especially railway, post, telegraphs, RBI, defense. City level agencies, which are nothing but the city improvement trusts, Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority. So these are also a part of city level agencies, and apart from it, SAIL, BHAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, as a part of their concern, they also take up the provision of housing. And finally, the cooperative societies, which are of again two types: individual and co-ownership. In individual, the reason for going for a cooperative society is that there will be concession in purchase of building materials as well as in terms of loans for housing. So when it is an individual ownership, which means that after repaying the loan, you are available to take up the land. So you enjoy the rights of your own house. In terms of co-ownership, 25 to 40% of the share capital is initially taken, and the remaining is being converted into loans, and you don't have till the end of it, you remain as a tenant for the society. Construction agencies in public and private sector. So, till now we were looking at the housing agencies involved. Now, construction, meaning there are just 3 construction agencies: large, small contractors, and at the smaller scale, mistris or laborers. So, these people take up repairs, renovation works. These people take bigger contractual works, especially in the case of a neighborhood, and these guys take city level projects. So, the small and the large is being judged based on the scale of the project they take, and of course, the number of employees who are permanent. So, based on these two, large and small contractors could be defined. So, there are also other major government initiatives that have been taken through the years for affordable housing. Formulation of National Urban Housing and Habitat Policy in 2007, which we were looking at, JNNURM, Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, Interest Subsidy Scheme for the Poor, Affordable Housing and Partnership, setting up of high power task force on affordable housing, launch of Rajiv Awas Yojana, which we will be looking at a later stage. So, now the question becomes crucial when there is huge amount of housing deficit, and especially as we were looking at affordable housing market last week, there is a supply demand. There is a anticipated demand of around 15 million homes for the population who earn between an income of 10,000 to 25,000 every month. So, for this, how shall a government provide housing becomes a key role, and especially private sector involvement is necessary when such a kind of huge housing deficit is to be found. For the involvement of private sector housing, you need few processes that has to be cleared. First, especially in India, fast track approvals for construction. Nowadays, any high level or a high scale project takes 3 or 4 months or 6 or 10 months for the approval process to be done even before execution, and this actually in this due course of time the prices increase, and of course the affordability goes down. Proper incentives and transferable development rights to recover the cost of investments. So, when a private investor is called for investing in a public or social housing, how does he benefit? What kind of incentive does he get in order to get the returns back? He is mostly profit motivated. Additional FSI as an incentive should also do good, and control market prices. So, one such example which was done before and tested was Rajasthan novel approach, where initially 13,000 houses were built in the first phase, which was successful in terms of transferable development rights, which means that shifting of once. So, say there is an FSI increase that is given from 1 to 3. Now, this additional FSI could be shifted to any other site of his own in the same city. So, which means that he can increase or realize profits in another site using the incentive which is given here. So, this was successful model, and the agency involved here was Rajasthan Awas Vikas and Infrastructure Limited. Now, there is a small difference between public housing and social housing. So, define that. Public housing may be a form of housing tenure in which the property is owned by the government authority, which may be central government or local government. And in terms of social housing, there is no possibility of any individual to own a house, and they are especially liable to pay rent, so that they focus on providing affordable housing solutions. Now, one key agency which is involved in housing provision, especially in India, is the Housing and Urban Development Corporation Limited. Set up in 1970 with an equity base of around 2 crore, it has established a wide range of products, especially in housing and infrastructure utilities. They also give special emphasis on low cost housing, development of new township and their own infrastructures, development of building material and technology, and especially industries, and they also take consultancy services within the country and outside the country. To assess the HUDCO performance at the end of 1999, it is believed that almost 55% and more than 70% of the HUDCO performance was based on provision of residential dwelling units for the rural and the sanitation units. So, they mostly focus on development of rural areas than in urban areas, and of course, equally the residential dwelling units in the urban areas have measured to be 27%, and the resource allocation for the HUDCO reveals that almost HIG and the other components are taken to be around 45%, and the remaining 55% are for the LIG and the EWS. This reveals the financing pattern for housing for the LIG and the EWS, which means that they have categorized few aspects. See, for example, in rural, the landlords including marginal farmers, landed, or maybe for the improvement and repair. So, they have a cost ceiling based on the provision. So, they have they can avail maximum for a landless including for a housing provision of rupees 25,000, and out of it the maximum loan ceiling provided by HUDCO to them is 20,000. So, which means that 80% of the total amount can be taken as loans at a rate of interest which is 10% for a tenure of 15 years. So, say for example, we calculate this at the rate of interest of 10% for 20,000, which means that they are liable to repay 22,000 rupees at the end of 180 months, which means that every month they are liable to pay approximately rupees 150, where their monthly income is around rupees 2,500. So, HUDCO classifies EWS, LIG, MIG and the HIG based on the income parameters. So, for EWS it is not more than an income of 2,500 per month. For MIG 2,500 to 5,500, up to 10,000 is considered to be MIG, and more than 10,000 is considered to be high income groups. So, the financial patterns completely change through these different sectors. So, the different interest rates policy of HUDCO reveals that the rate of interest and the repayment period are kind of proportional to each other. Say for example, in EWS the rate of interest is considered to be low compared to HIG, which is 16%, and the repayment period decreases, which means that when the rate of interest increases from the higher income to the lower income, this decreases. So, the repayment period, when it is given more at a low rate of interest, the repayment per month would be less as compared to the high income groups, and the extent of financing for housing is also given, which actually reduces from the economically weaker section to the high income, which means that HUDCO promotes affordable housing. It wants more access to people, especially in the terms of housing, and the provision of housing dwelling units breakup. As you could see, facts reveal that 75% of the population or 75% of the EWS category gets benefited from the schemes of HUDCO. So, housing by HUDCO. As on 31st March 2015, the HUDCO has revealed that it is built 166.19 lakh dwelling units, benefiting the entire spectrum of the society. So, out of which 1/4 of the quadrant, which is around 41.58 lakh dwelling units, are especially for upgradations. And out of the spectrum, around 61.7 lakh dwelling units and the remaining 104.89 dwelling units are for the rural and urban. So, which means that this also clearly reveals more investment is done or more finances have been flown into the rural sector development. So, till March 31, it has been revealed that HUDCO has involved themselves in 14,858 projects excluding infrastructure projects, which has an investment of around 54,098 crores. So, set up in 1970, over 4 decades or 5 decades, it has grown to a level from an equity base of 2 crores to 54,098 crores. This is just excluding infrastructure. Housing loans. So, which also reveal that the entire spectrum, almost 43.59% of the dispersal of loans benefited the EWS and LIG at a rate of interest of around 8.5% and 9.75%, and all these are floating rate of interest. So, when the market is up and the rate of interest goes down, and especially they get benefited out of it. So, out of this, 92% of the dwelling units which have been built assisted by HUDCO fall under this category. So, much of assistance in the project oriented, ensuring that housing is affordable, technically sound, financially viable, legally acceptable, and above all environmentally appropriate. So, these are the key strategies, especially when HUDCO looks at housing provision. HUDCO also plays a major role in implementation of national housing policy. So, it has been entrusted with the implementation of priority programs, especially in the central ministry, like low cost sanitation, night shelter for footpath dwellers, shelter upgradation under Nehru Yozgar Yojana, rural housing under minimum needs program. Okay. Besides this, HUDCO gives specialized attention to critical segments of infrastructure development in cities. So, let us take a look at what are all the schemes they are involved in. So, involved in 6 major segments, including the water supply, sewage, sanitation and solid waste management, roads, transport infrastructure and other utility infrastructure, area development, development of social infrastructure and the commercial facilities. So, as on 31 March 2015, the total investments that have been taken under water supply include 480 schemes with an investment of 23,510 crores. Sewage, 125 schemes, sewage, solid waste management and other schemes of 125 with an investment of 5894 crores. Roads, 47 schemes with an investment of 25,745 crores. Area development, 172 schemes with an investment of 1587 crores. Social infrastructure, around 416 schemes with an investment of around 5003 crores. And finally, commercial, which is the less sector, but the investment of it is around 32,424 crores. So, on totality, HUDCO since its inception has involved in around 20-25 urban infrastructure schemes with an investment of around 94,164 crores. So, besides HUDCO involving in housing and urban infrastructure programs, it also invests in building technologies. It sets up centers and especially it has sanctioned around 655 building centers, especially to develop low cost building materials and technologies, and it also takes up design and consultancy services in India as well as abroad. Now, the challenge of housing shortage could be tackled successfully only through sound housing policy, ensuring increased inputs, physical as well as financial, motivate and assist the houseless to secure for themselves affordable shelters in the shortest time possible. So, other than this, the housing programs where HUDCO involves themselves is urban housing, that is loans are provided by HUDCO in the segment of urban housing category for repairs and provision of plots, and it is also directly providing funds to the public to construct their own houses. Rural housing, loans for agencies nominated by the government to produce houses especially in the rural areas, and cooperative housing, it also spends money or gives to the primary house building societies and the state level financing societies. Other than this, they are also involved in rental housing, staff housing, women night shelters, women condominiums. So, there are other schemes where HUDCO actively involves in. The government action plan schemes where housing HUDCO involves itself is VAMBE, Valmiki Ambedkar Awas Yojana, where to provide and upgrade shelter for the families who are below poverty line. Second is additional 2 million housing program every year. So, it is to provide every year 2 million housing stock, which envisages construction of around 2 million houses every year, out of which 1,030,000, which is 1.3 million for the rural segment and 0.7 million for the urban segment, and loan assistance would be given for 1 million houses, again in the 60-40 ratio, 60 for the rural sector and 40 for the urban sector. And Swarna Jayanti Sahari Rozgar Yojana, which envisions generating employment opportunities through shelter upgradation and training. Housing finance agencies that the Housing Urban Development Corporation supports, including National Housing Bank, which is the key player especially in financing, established in 1988 as an APIC institution, and it has an equity shared from RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and LIC. It is a financial institution assisting in the form of loans to housing finance corporations. So, to know what Housing Finance Corporation is, it provides loans to individual and state level agencies. It is promoted and supported by the National Housing Bank and Housing Development Finance Corporation. So, the individual state agencies, in order to provide housing boards and different housing sectors within a state, HFCs involved in it. And finally, LIC, the Life Insurance Corporation, is single largest lending institution, and where out of it obliges to invest 25% of its additional resources to the socially oriented sectors like housing, sewerage, and etc. To summarize today's session, so we have been looking at what were all the housing policies over the years which have helped in provision of housing, and different housing sectors, their roles and their involvement in provision of housing. So, key questions to be answered includes the concerns and activities of HUDCO, National Housing Policy and Urban Habitat Policy, role of housing agencies in provision of housing, rural, public and private sector housing, the brief of the 5-year plans and its essence in the growth of national economy. Further directions and research to be carried out as mentioned, and out of which examples of public and private sector housing in India would do good. So, we will be looking at the impact of traditional lifestyle and other socio-economic aspects of housing in the next class. Thank you.